Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first session of the 2021 Virtual FGR Conference. My name is Phil Taylor, and I'm the Managing Director of Port Blakely. I'm also the current President of the New Zealand Forest Owners Association, and I am on the board of the Forest Growers Levy Trust. This is the organisation that provides the largest proportion of industry funding, which supports the research projects that you'll hear about over the course of the next couple of days. I'm also the past chair of the joint NZFOA-NZFFA Research Committee, a position now ably filled by Ian Hinton. I have over 40 years' experience in the forest industry and have a passion for all things forestry. I am very much looking forward to this session, given the calibre of presenters we have available to us this morning. The first session today is entitled Digital and Automated Forestry, and this runs from 8:55 through to 10:05. We have three excellent speakers lined up, including John Moore, Russell Burton, and Graham West. All these speakers will be well known to most of you. Prior to the focus session on digital and automated forestry, Dr. Julian Elder, again well known to most of you as the CEO of Scion, will present on Scion's strategy. I've worked closely with Julian over many years, and under his leadership, Scion has been championing the critical importance of the biocircular economy to New Zealand's future. Julian will be talking about three research impact areas through to 2023 of the Scion strategy. And these are forests and landscapes, high-value timber manufacturing and products, and bio-based manufacturing and products. Following Julian's presentation on Scion's strategy, there will be three separate and focused presentations as follows. Firstly, John Moore will present on the topic, Getting to the Heart of Wood Quality, Insight from New Technologies. Many of you will be familiar with John, previously a lead scientist within Scion, but now working for Timberlands. John has a long history working in the area of forest productivity and wood quality, and now has the challenging role of driving productivity increases across the Timberlands Kayangaroa estate. The Achilles heel for radiata pine has always been its low-quality cordwood. John will be talking about new and developing technologies to address this challenge. Our second speaker will be Russell Burton. Again, Russell has a long history of involvement in forest research in New Zealand. Previously working in a senior leadership role with Scion, Russell now provides consulting services and leadership support to the forest sector. Russell will be presenting on Propagating Our Future Forests, an update on the 21st Century Tissue Culture Programme. This is a critically important area of research as the New Zealand forest industry looks to scale up production of fit-for-purpose planting material. The Climate Change Commission has provided advice to the government, including the need to target the establishment of 380,000 hectares of additional plantation forests over the next 15 years. One of the immediate challenges with this target is how we scale up production and capture genetic gain in a cost-effective way. Russell will provide an update of one of the key FGR research projects aimed at addressing this challenge. The final presentation will come from Graham West. Graham West is the current president of the New Zealand Farm Forestry Association, a forestry consultant in his own right, and previously a scientist at Scion. Graham will be talking about integrating information for site-specific management. I must confess to not being 100% sure on what Graham is going to be saying, but I can guarantee that it will be interesting, well thought through, and no doubt provocative. I'm very much looking forward to Graham's presentation. At the conclusion of the pre-recorded presentations, we will go to a live Q&A session that will take us through to a refreshment break at 10:05. I'd encourage all attendees to ask those challenging questions that you've always wanted answers to, but on subject, of course. It's not often that we get four speakers of this calibre, so this is an opportunity not to be missed. You can lodge your questions directly into the question portal at any time during this session. At the end of all the presentations, I'll select and moderate the questions received and direct them to the appropriate speaker. So, without further ado, get your cup of tea, get comfortable, and please let me call on Julian as the first speaker.
Tēnā koutou, no North Shore aho, ko aho te tumu whakaari o Sion, ko Julian Elder aho. As I said in my opening, I'm Julian Elder, Chief Executive of Sion, and I'm here today to talk to you through a little bit of our strategy journey that we've been having at Sion for about the last 3 years, and really a strategy to support the future of forestry and what we see as the very large opportunity. You're all aware that the New Zealand forestry industry is the third largest export earner, worth over $6 billion a year and employs more than 35,000 people. Some of you will probably tell me that during COVID we might have been the second largest export earner, but certainly very significant for New Zealand. And I think one of the things that always excited me when I was asked about coming to Sion was the opportunities in front of the sector and the benefits that could be delivered for New Zealand. It always stood out in my mind the opportunity to double the growth rate of our plantation forests, mean annual increment, by 2050. That's a huge change that could be delivered. And there's a very significant opportunity to add value to the fibre we grow and the residuals that we don't use. In looking at that picture, there was a real question around, well, what's Sion's role in this? So we go back to our statement of core purpose, and this is mandated by Cabinet. And it states that Sion's core purpose is to drive innovation and growth from New Zealand's forestry, wood product and wood-derived materials and other biomaterial sectors to create economic value and contribute to beneficial environmental and social outcomes for New Zealand. We've examined this purpose, I guess, and debated it a number of times, but really concluded that in relation to what we're doing, it is very appropriate and apt to the future opportunities and challenges we see in front of the country. But it resulted in quite a challenge that I'll cover next. And the challenge comes about because of our belief that there is a huge opportunity in light of the changes and challenges the world is facing. There had been little engagement with government and ministers on how to progress these challenges and opportunities. When I started, it was common with particularly senior ministers to talk about all sorts of other export revenue earners in the country, but never mention forestry. That has changed, but we now want to make sure that it's changing in the best direction for the country. Our challenge at Sion is that our revenue is within commercial contracts which have already defined deliverables, mostly decided by the contract holder as against enabling us to deliver on our purpose. So on one hand we see this huge opportunity, and on the other hand we spend a lot of our time winning whatever bids we can win and doing what's contained within those bids. Research and development is essential to delivering on the opportunities. However, it cannot be delivered through R&D alone and needs mission-led programs with partners, particularly in forestry. As you all know, forestry is a long game. So we decided we needed to develop a compelling narrative and get all stakeholders engaged to deliver what we see as a very bright future if we do this. So the compelling narrative started by looking out to 2050 and saying, well, what could we enable through the power of forestry? And the things that we've stipulated here is, I guess, aspirational, so a 10-fold increase in GDP from forests and manufacturing, zero carbon emissions, erodible land planted in permanent forests, water quality issues from land use mitigated, sustainable communities and economies, high OECD household net wealth ranking, a top 5 ranking in OECD Better Life Index. So these are really quite aspirational outcomes and impacts that we identified that forestry could play a central role in enabling for New Zealand by 2050. And the aim is to paint this compelling picture for people to go, yes, that is a future that we would like to work towards. and then move on to working out, well, what role would forestry play in that if it was enabled to do so. So we looked at this and decided that for our sector there was three primary focus areas that we would look at in terms of making impact. So we defined those three research impact areas through to 2030 as being forests and landscapes, and these are forests that are primarily planted for their standing forest purposes. Forests through to high value timber products, timber manufacturing and products, and forest through to bio-based manufacturing and products. The first one, forests and landscapes, we've split into three portfolios: establishing indigenous forests, restoration, protection and Maori of Te Wānui Atane, and designing forests mahi tahi whaihua. And as I said, this is primarily focused on permanent standing benefits from forests, these three portfolios. The types of impacts that we envisage these portfolios contributing to by 2030 was an 8 million tonne increase in sequestered carbon in new forests, converting 30% of underused Maori land to standing forests, 100% increase in value of Maori standing forests, 80% increase in forested area to enhance soil and water resources, biodiversity, landscape resilience and the locking of soil, and 100% increase in the use for forests for human health and well-being. The aim of these impact measures is to set, again, some aspirational goals and a direction of travel so that we can then evaluate what will need to happen for those sorts of outcomes to be achieved. Now, over time, those outcomes will modify as our context changes, but the direction of travel is the one that we're trying to determine now, and who will need to be engaged with that, and what are the challenges in getting there that we will need to overcome, and who will need to be involved to do that. So very much, again, not focused on, at this point, on what does our research will be doing, but what are all of the aspects that will need to be taken on board if we're going to get there. The next impact focus area is forest to timber products, and its portfolios are trees for high volume wood products. So that's sort of the commodity end of what we do in plantation forestry. Trees for high value wood products. And I guess one of the areas there that we have been focused on, but we'll be focused on other species as well, is some of the strengths of Pinus radiata in terms of its ability to be modified as a key strength of that species. Indigenous trees for distinct value wood products, and the new value digital forests and wood sector. It's interesting to note the range of stakeholders that are becoming more and more interested in data and digitisation of the sector, and what we can do with that. So the sorts of impacts from those portfolios that we are looking to help the country deliver on by 2030 is increased GDP by $10 billion through low emission, forest diversity, timber products and sustainable and healthy communities. 1 million tonnes of CO2 reduction from the adoption of circular principles. 2 new living New Zealand communities adopting circular living concepts. Moving on to the third impact area, IA3, forests to bio-based products. And the 4 portfolios are high-value biorefineries, distributed and circular manufacturing. Particularly excited about distributed and circular manufacturing because the global trends around manufacturing are to smaller scale, which suits New Zealand much more than, I guess, the very large-scale petrochemical industries did. And we see these activities moving much closer to the feedstock, so into the forest as an example, but certainly also into our regional communities. So very much about new activities out there in our regions. Bioproducts and packaging, I think we're all aware of the drive away from things like single-use plastics. We want new plastic materials that are sustainable and bio-based and don't have the environmental impacts that we have now. And packaging has always been a significant part of Scion because New Zealand is an export economy, and to export our goods, particularly our primary goods, then packaging is a very significant role to play. And integrated bioenergy, you'll have heard much in recent times about biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels that are being talked about. One of the comments I'll make in that space is we're very persistent about talking to people to think about these things as systems, not as individual desegregated components. The sorts of impacts that we're looking to from these portfolios for New Zealand, 3 new biofindings established. We'd like to see one of those with indigenous plants as feedstock, $20 billion sustainable GDP growth, 2,500 regional high-value jobs, 300 million litres and $2 billion fuel and plastic substitution, and 10 million tonnes reduction in CO2 equivalents. So again, this is all about trying to paint this picture of opportunity and benefit to New Zealand, and we can see it really revitalising our regions and some vibrant communities and new landscapes and a mosaic of activity across our landscape. So this is a really important conversation for everyone to engage in as to what do we see that looking like and how do we go about doing it. So that was the development, I guess, of our compelling narrative to get people to say, is this the right journey we should be on? And then start to look at, well, what are the key issues, what are the obstacles, what will we need to bring together to actually go on that journey. So where to from here? What we felt we needed to do was develop roadmaps to 2030 for each of these portfolios. So the roadmaps would need to have what are the sort of milestones along the way to measure our progress towards those aspirational impacts that we've outlined. Who will need to be involved, what will need to happen to get there, and really set out some project logic maps around each of the portfolios. We started on this journey by internal workshops, putting some of our ideas down on paper as a straw man, doing some stakeholder mapping and then starting to engage with stakeholders, and particularly we've had 2 industry and partner workshops as well as interactions with government. And that has started to develop the roadmaps, and we will be consulting further as we develop up those roadmaps. That will then lead on to our planning of our research programs and the future of Scion. We named these workshops quadruple helix workshops because it was important that all stakeholders are engaged in this process that cannot be delivered by one entity alone. So these workshops were made up with representatives from industry, Maori, research and government. And as you can see there, they were called Unleashing the Full Potential of Forest to Deliver a Circular Bioeconomy for Aotearoa. This process that we're following, I guess, is now to really flesh out what are we going to do between now and 2030 and who's going to need to do what. So key issues have been developed out of these workshops and have been captured and repeated again from the first workshop to the second workshop. We're also going to do a follow-up one shortly with our staff, and as we develop out and flesh out those key issues, we will then feed those into the roadmaps and send them out and consult further on them as they shape up to make sure that we are identifying both the opportunities but also what will need to happen to deliver on those. An important part, I guess, of the strategy has been sort of getting the message out. And to get the message out, we've done, I guess, a range of things. We've developed this compelling narrative. We're now consulting widely on that. But one of the light bulb moments, I guess, when I started here was showing people around Scion, and almost every time there was this response, gosh, we had no idea that you guys were doing that, or you know, wow, that's an amazing opportunity. People should know more about it. And even here in Rotorua, we were sort of the secret science establishment behind the fence. And that really came out. We decided to do a pop-up shop in town during the school holidays, and it was a hugely positive response. So that led us to the feeling that we needed to, if you like, take down the fence and open us up to much more to the public and to others. And as part of that, developing this innovation hub, this new building, which is shown here in the picture. And the building, we were very privileged to be gifted the name Te Wharanui o Tuteata by Mana Whenua. And it is a stunning building. Everyone who sees it mentions that. And it you know, weaved into it is a story from Mana Whenua, the story from Scion, the pattern on the roof that you can see there is reflecting the DNA sequence Pinus radiata, and the lights are in the pattern of Matariki. And of course it's demonstrating what we can actually do with timber in wooden buildings. And also in the building is a public cafe aligned with getting more people in and seeing what we should be doing. And on one side we have the experience centre, so you can come in here and interactively engage with all of the things that Scion have been thinking about in terms of what could deliver on this future, bright future that we've outlined in our compelling narrative. So I do invite you, when you get the chance, to come in and get your kids along to experience that too, because we need to absolutely get that message out. As we've said, I guess the strategy is about this fact that the world is moving away from a linear petrochemical economy to a sustainable circular bioeconomy in response to climate change. So the proposition that we're putting forward here is that the world's response to climate change is actually New Zealand's opportunity. We're seeing increasingly rapid movement, I guess, away from things that people consider are negative to our climate and our environment. I mean, you'll have seen the fairly recent banning of single-use plastic bags, through to government statements now about polystyrene and hard to recycle plastics, hard to recycle single-use plastics. And that, from our perspective, is only accelerating. We're seeing multi-globals really starting now to move beyond statements of carbon zero to statements of restoration of the environment and their future activities. So in summary, we do see this global climate change challenge as a huge opportunity for New Zealand. We've said potentially $30 billion GDP in 10 years. As we have natural competitive advantages in this future. Namely, we've always been a bioeconomy, relatively little investment sunk in large-scale petrochemical supply chains. We have a great environment for growing food and fibre. We have excellent research and development expertise. New Zealand already has a global sustainable clean green image, and Te Ao Māori is a unique part of the value proposition. So the aim of the roadmaps is to show how to get to the impacts and what will need to happen and who will need to act across all stakeholders, including government, industry, existing and not yet existing industry, iwi and research. We hope this will lead to a system change enabling research to be more mission-led alongside all other necessary actors if impact is going to be fully realised. Just one point, we know that the government's shortly to come out with a future pathways consultation package, so I do engage about the future of the science system, so I do ask you to engage in that, make sure we define the problems well, and evolve the system to deliver even more for New Zealand. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, my name's John Moore and I'm the Research and Development Manager for Timberlands. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the annual Forest Growers Research Conference, which unfortunately, like last year, due to COVID, is an online conference. My presentation today focuses on the work that we're doing at Timberlands to better understand the wood quality in our estate through the application of new technologies. As forest growers, we focus on growing the maximum volume of the most valuable log grades. These grades are mostly determined by external attributes such as diameter, length, taper, sweep, and branch size. However, internal attributes are also important for many of our customers, as these determine the performance of the end products they make. These performance requirements depend on the product being considered, but can include attributes such as strength, stiffness, dimensional stability, colour, appearance, durability, tear, burst, and tensile strength. Forest growers generally use surrogates for these requirements, as these are attributes that can be measured in the field. These surrogates include density, microfibril angle, acoustic velocity, heartwood content, branch size, resin pocket incidence, and compression wood content. As managers, we would like to understand the impacts that our forest management practices have on internal wood properties and the potential implications for the performance of the current suite of products made from our resource, as well as for new products that may be made from it in the future. At Timberlands, we are focused heavily on increasing forest productivity through tree breeding, including the deployment of elite clones, enhanced forest nutrition, and changes to our silvicultural practices. There have been concerns around the impacts of productivity on enhancement on wood quality. Take genetics, for example. We know that traits such as density and stiffness have adverse genetic correlations with growth traits, and this was particularly apparent in clone 55. Nutrition is another area where there was the perception that applying fertiliser would lead to a reduction in wood density. Finally, if we do manage to increase productivity, it follows that rotation age will reduce, and here again there have been concerns expressed that wood quality will suffer. Therefore, it is important for us at Timberlands to understand the impacts of our productivity enhancement strategy on wood quality. Wood density has been one of the most widely studied wood properties due to its relative ease of measurement and the fact that it is correlated with many other wood properties and some aspects of end product performance. Outer wood density samples are particularly easy to collect, and large numbers of these have been collected through density surveys undertaken by FRI, as it was at the time, and as part of numerous research studies. Analysis of these data can be used to show the regional level variation in wood density that exists, which is useful for strategic decision making around fibre supply. At Timberlands, we have collected numerous outer wood density cores as part of our pre-harvest inventory program and more recently our age 10 inventory program. Here too, we can see that density varies significantly across our estate, mostly driven by differences in mean annual temperature. Studies such as the benchmarking study carried out by the Wood Quality Initiative in the early 2000s gave us some new insights into the internal variation in wood properties that exist within and among trees. The three examples in this slide show the average radial and longitudinal variation in wood density, microfibril angle, and modulus of elasticity that exist within a tree. Each figure represents a vertical slice through the stem with the pith on the left-hand side and the bark on the right. What is apparent from these graphs is the core wood zone near the pith that contains wood with low density, high microfibril angle, and low stiffness. A question for us as managers is, are we stuck with core wood, or is there something that we can do about it? Often an arbitrary definition of the innermost 10 rings at all heights up the stem has been applied, which suggests that rotation age is the only option to manage core wood. However, we believe that it could be possible to manage core wood through other means, such as tree improvement and silviculture. For us at Timberlands, this is why we are so interested to know much more about wood properties beyond just outer wood density. The other reason is that we want to avoid any unpleasant surprises, such as this. As much as I'd like to say this disc did not come from our estate, this would simply not be true. There are a wide range of non-destructive evaluation techniques and tools out there that are able to provide estimates of different wood properties. Most of you are probably familiar with portable acoustic tools, such as the ST300 and HM200 developed by Fibergen, that have been widely used in New Zealand and overseas for resource characterisation studies. You are probably less familiar with tools such as the resistograph, corebot and discbot. The rest of my presentation will focus on how timberlands are using these tools to better understand our resource and the impacts of some of our interventions aimed at increasing productivity. The studies that I will present are very much a work in progress, but the aim is to provide you with an overview of the types of questions we are asking, the tools and techniques we are using to answer these questions, and the results we have obtained to date. Before I launch into that, I'd like to acknowledge and thank colleagues at Scion who have done the collection of RESI data, collection and analysis of corebot cores, and the scanning and analysis of discbot samples. They have also been instrumental in developing and in further enhancing these systems to help answer our questions of interest. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Timberlands and our contractors who have helped with the disc collection. Unfortunately, we haven't yet managed to automate disc collection, so we rely on the sterling efforts of people in the field to collect our samples. The first study I'd like to discuss focuses on examining the differences in core wood properties among selected clones. As many of you are aware, Timberlands has been deploying clones operationally since around 2008. Currently, about 25% of our new plantings are with clonal stock. Each year we plant establishment archive trials which contain all our operational seedlots and clones planted in 100-tree plots on the same site in a replicated design. We've been doing this since 2004, so have amassed quite a lot of data. Last year we carried out non-destructive and destructive sampling of a selection of production clones to assess wood and fibre properties. We even removed billets from selected clones for pulping studies to see if there were discernible differences in pulp and paper characteristics. Overall, 6 production clones were sampled in 2 separate establishment archive trials located in different parts of our estate. 12 rammets of each clone were sampled at each site, along with 12 trees from a reference seedlot, 99185. Some of you will probably be familiar with this seedlot, which has a nominal GF19 rating and is used as a control in many large plot genetic gain trials. It is supposed to represent the level of genetic improvement in the crop that is currently being harvested. We also selected another seedlot, 08502, which had high GF plus trait ratings for both growth and wood density. On each selected tree, information on DBH, total height and green crown length were collected, which revealed some differences among genetic entities. Bark-to-bark resistance traces were recorded at breast height with the resistograph, along with bark-to-bark cores. Standing tree acoustic velocity measurements were made using the ST300 tool. Resistance traces were processed using the RESI processor software developed by Jeff Downs of Forest Quality in Australia to obtain predicted density and acoustic wave velocity. The bark-to-bark cores were scanned with the corebot, which is Scion's discbot modified to take core samples. For each core, information on density and chemical composition were obtained. From these measurements, we found that there were large differences in wood density among the clones. Clones A and B had much higher values of density than the other clones and the reference seedlot at both archives trials, as shown in the 2 panels in the left-hand half of the slide. We also found that the resistograph tool was very good at predicting average core density at the individual tree level, as shown in the panel on the right. This demonstrates the utility of this tool for rapid wood quality assessment, at least for wood density. Moving on to wood stiffness, we again see large differences among the genetic entities in the trials, but these differences do not mirror the trends observed for wood density. For example, clone C, which had low wood density, had relatively high wood stiffness measured on both the standing tree and felled stems. This is not unexpected, as wood density and wood stiffness are not well correlated in the core wood. What it also highlights is that simply relying on wood density as an indicator of core wood quality could lead to some erroneous conclusions. We observed a positive relationship between tree slenderness, or height to DBH ratio, and acoustic velocity measured on standing trees. This showed that individuals that were more slender had higher stiffness values, which has been demonstrated previously in a range of trials. Regarding wood chemistry, we observed substantial differences in whole core average values of lignin and glucose content. This information, along with data on fibre properties and handsheet properties, is useful for the pulp and paper industry when evaluating genotypes in terms of their suitability for pulping. We're still working through these data to better understand what they are telling us. We also felled each tree that had standing tree measurements made on it. From each tree, 4 discs were collected up the stem at 1.4, 3, 6 and 9 metres. These discs were scanned using the DiscBot to yield information on the distributions of density, wood stiffness and chemical composition within a disc. These maps are helping us to understand patterns of variation in properties, such as the extent and severity of the low stiffness region and the amount of compression wood. As I noted earlier in my presentation, this is still a work in progress. To help with this type of analysis, Scion have been developing algorithms that automatically detect ring boundaries so that we can map wood properties to a specific year. This enables us to identify age-related trends and the impacts of treatments that occurred in a specific year, such as a thinning or a fertiliser application. Ring detection might sound like a trivial task, but I can assure you that it is not. Many very clever people have tried to do this with limited success, which is why it is very exciting to see the progress that Christine Todoroki at Scion has made. She appears to have cracked this problem, which will enable much more detailed analysis of our DiscBot data. Without going into a lot of detail, her approach identifies rings based on the density information and essentially unwinds the disc, flattening out the data before fitting smoothing splines to detect the ring boundaries. Another focus area for us at Timberlands is forest nutrition. We have been investigating mid-rotation fertiliser applications for many years, but in 2018 we worked with Scion to install large replicated trials testing different rates of a fertiliser blend that was developed to deliver the optimum ratio of nutrients required for tree growth. At all 3 sites where we applied this blend, we have seen large positive growth responses relative to the untreated controls. In some cases, the volume growth after 3 years has been up to 50% higher in the treated plots relative to the untreated controls. As I mentioned earlier, there have been concerns raised in the past about the potential impacts of fertiliser application on wood properties. However, recent work by Scion, which looked at samples collected from the long-term site productivity trials, showed that there were few, if any, adverse effects of fertiliser application on wood properties. In these trials, particularly the one at Woodhill Forest, fertiliser was applied at rates far in excess of what would be done operationally. Nevertheless, we still believe that it is important to test whether our nutrition strategy might have any adverse impacts on wood quality. It's better to find out now than learn the hard way in years to come. We are in the process of collecting data from the nutrition trials that were installed in 2018. However, we did collect samples from an earlier trial in 2020, which compared the growth response of plots receiving 450 kilograms per hectare of urea to untreated control plots. In this trial, we sampled 10 trees from each treatment. Tree size measurements were made and 4 discs were collected from each tree at 1.4, 3, 6 and 9 metres up the stem. Acoustic velocity was measured on the felled stem using the HM200 tool. There were minor differences in tree size observed between the trees sampled from the 2 treatments. There was also a slight reduction in HM200 acoustic velocity in the trees that received fertiliser. We also observed some examples of interesting patterns of wood properties from the DiscBot data. We found some discs where there had been a slowing of growth followed by a rapid increase. The disc shown in the slide actually came from a plot that had not received fertiliser, so it is more likely to be the result of the tree being released from local competition. What it does show is the rapid increase in growth was accompanied by the production of a large amount of compression wood, which has lower stiffness as seen in the middle plot and higher lignin content as shown in the plot on the right. Fortunately, this was not a common occurrence, but it does serve to illustrate what rapid changes in competition may do to wood properties. We are also doing more detailed investigations into the effect of spacing and thinning on wood quality, particularly in light of the result that we have just observed. The effects of spacing on tree growth and morphology have been extensively studied. Tighter tree spacing leads to more rapid crown recession, resulting in a tree with smaller branches and higher height to diameter ratio. It also reduces radial growth, as shown in the figure on the left. In 2020, we installed 2 trials to investigate whether it was possible to control core wood extent and properties through manipulating initial planting spacing. These trials contained initial planting densities ranging from 625 stems per hectare up to 1,515 stems per hectare, which was pretty much the upper limit of what our spot mounting operators could achieve. Obviously, these trials are going to take a while to yield any useful data and results. However, we were fortunate to discover an old trial on our estate that was established by Fletcher Challenge Forests. This trial included 4 levels of initial planting density, 350, 550, 750 and 1,000 stems per hectare. The intention was to thin all plots to 350 stems per hectare not that long after planting, but this never happened, so this became a plant and leave trial. This enabled us to look at the impact on core wood properties. We sampled 10 trees from each of the 4 initial planting densities. As in previous studies, we collected 4 discs from each tree at different heights up the stem. At the whole disc level, we can see large differences in wood stiffness, or ultrasonic velocity, among the spacing treatments. Trees planted at the widest spacing, 350 stems per hectare, had lower stiffness, particularly at breast height. This is shown as treatment C on the graph. Differences in wood density among treatments did exist, but these were not as pronounced as differences in stiffness. Looking at a selection of discs from this trial, the larger core wood zone in the trees planted at 350 stems per hectare is apparent in the middle column of the left-hand panel, which shows the lower ultrasonic velocity, and in the right-hand column showing the higher lignin content. Again, once we can apply the ring detection algorithms to these data, it will be possible to undertake more thorough analyses to quantify these differences in core wood properties. Finally, we are also investigating whether it is possible to reduce harvest age under certain conditions and still provide our structural sawmill customers with an acceptable product. Reducing harvest age with no loss in quality would enable us to capitalise on our productivity enhancement work and is also a mitigation against future climate change risk, as my colleague Ian Hinton will discuss in a later presentation. Each year we identify a number of stands in our harvest level and valuation estate model that could be harvested early were it not for a minimum harvest age criteria that we impose as a constraint. One of these stands is in Tarawera Forest, and we looked at it for a potential young age harvest when it was 15 years old. Without more detailed analyses, we were not comfortable simply sending logs to the mill and seeing what resulted. Last year, when the stand was 17 years old, we felled 15 trees and had 60 discs analysed with the disc-bot. We also took log sonic measurements and outer wood density cores. The log sonic measurements were mostly above 2.85 kilometres per second, and the breast height outer wood density was almost 450 kilograms per cubic metre. Analysis of the discs has indicated that the core wood zone appears to be restricted to the innermost 6 rings, and if a sawmill was to box this out during processing, an acceptable yield of structural timber could be obtained. To sum up, tools such as the CoreBot, DiscBot and Resistograph enable us to gain more insight into wood property variation and its drivers than simple point measurements. We've begun to apply these tools to obtain more information on how factors such as genetics, nutrition, management, tree spacing and rotation age affect wood properties and the potential impacts for our customers. There is still much to do in this area, as ensuring that our productivity enhancement strategies don't have an adverse impact on wood quality is key to their success. What we've observed so far shows us that it is important to understand the growth dynamics of trees in order to better understand wood property variation. We are fortunate to have built up a good data set in a relatively short period of time, and more detailed analysis of these data using new analytical methods will yield further insights and much valuable information. Working with organisations such as Scion and FWPA is allowing us to access these improved analytical methods. Finally, we are continuing to collect new data from a range of experiments throughout our estate, which will help us provide further clarity on the properties of the future resource that will come from our estate. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to meeting with you in the panel discussion later.
Hello, I'm Russell Burton, the Program Manager for the FGR's program, the 21st Century Tissue Culture. I look forward to actually providing an overview of that with you today. Tissue Culture Partnership is an industry-government partnership aimed at speeding up the deployment of the best radiata pine genetics available. This was identified as a priority by the Forest Research Council. The basis of the program is to industrialise somatic embryogenesis of radiata pine and position it such that the opportunity to use varietals in commercial forestry is substantially expanded, providing real benefits in the supply chain and in the forest. Tissue Culture Partnership is now entering its third year. The purpose of this short presentation is to provide an update, reminder of what we're doing and why, who is involved, and the progress that is being made. Continuing focus on profitability from forestry, increasing environmental pressure, the risks from pests and pathogens, combined with the impact of climate change, along with the usual commercial demands on increasing wood quality and uniformity, puts pressure on tree breeding and realising the benefits from the products of that work in breeding. This is not a tree breeding program, it is a deployment program. Our focus is to create an opportunity for rapid deployment of targeted genotypes as varietals, helping in delivering the benefits and the qualities of trees in any given stand, but also delivering greater stand uniformity and growth uniformity over using families, which creates cost saving to the forestry company. The foundation of the program is somatic embryogenesis, a process that starts with cultivation of immature zygotic embryos formed after controlled pollination and extracted from green cones. The embryogenic tissue can be cryopreserved, and this cuts to the heart of the real advantages of somatic embryogenesis over other techniques of vegetative propagation, and that you can subsequently propagate from proven genotypes. When you know you have a top performer, you can just take that satellite out of the cryotank or liquid nitrogen and start propagating it from it, hence the ability to focus on known performers and elite genotypes. From there, we focus on the maturation and germination steps. Currently, there is an additional step of organogenesis used for multiplication and to support rooting. Although this is still an option for us, our ideal is to be able to take somatic embryogenesis material directly and go straight to the ex vitro step, putting these plugs into plugs and then into the nursery. And that removes the extra ex vitro step. Through exploiting other technologies, such as the use of bioreactors, robotics and automation, it lends itself to scalability and also the potential to be very cost-effective process for propagation. This assumes we can develop large quantities of mature embryos and do this consistently. Somatic embryogenesis is not new. It's already used in New Zealand. The current practice uses transference and retransference of the embryogenic tissue and developing mature somatic embryos in semi-solid gel media, and this is quite a labour-intensive process. The point of difference that we seek to exploit is to use liquid media in bioreactors to proliferate embryogenic tissue, allowing the emerging embryos to mature and then subsequently germinate. The composition of the media and the environment can be automatically altered as we proceed. No manual input is required. The use of liquid media lends itself to scalability and supports the use of robotics and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence to identify the good and the bad embryos, and robotics to undertake the transference process into the germination stage and later putting the plantlets into plugs ready for the nursery. In effect, this means that we have the potential to go from setting cell lines in the reactor all the way through to putting the plantlet into a plug without having to touch the biological material at any point, improving efficiency and using labour, ensuring sterility at all stages, and ensuring very exact control over the environment in which the biological material develops. It all sounds very simple, but of course it's not. We're having to develop new processes and learn how radiata will behave in these environments. It's not just about the science. We also need to understand how developing what will be a disruptive technology can fit into existing supply chains. And to that end, although Scion leads the science, we have several very experienced science collaborators. For example, Georgia Institute of Technology in the USA, who have a lot of experience in using temporary immersion bioreactors and also experience with robotics and automation and application to trees. They've also developed a prototype of a robotics artificial intelligence system called the Fluidic system that can transfer mature somatic embryos from a bioreactor, undertaking the germination stage, and then later from this to positioning the plantlet into a solid plug ready for transfer into a nursery. We've been able to work with their system to improve and modify its use for application to radiata pine. We're also working with the Natural Resources Institute of Finland, LUCA, who have a vast amount of experience with somatic embryogenesis, although not with radiata pine, but exploiting their knowledge and taking SC-derived plantlets directly into a nursery environment, and also their experience with cold storage of this type of material. Critically, we have a lot of support from industry, including Timberlands, Arbogen, the Radiata Pine Breeding Company, Proseed, Olson's, Matariki Rainier, and Hancock Forest Management. Challenges we have to address are many. For example, the use of temporary immersion bioreactors with radiata pine is pioneering new territory and technology. And we all know that much as we love radiata pine, it is not an easy species to work with at a cellular level. We also know that genotypes behave in different ways. The application of robotics and artificial intelligence to radiata pine, again, pioneering new territory, but leveraging off the experiences at Georgia Institute of Technology and with other species. The ability to successfully transfer somatic embryogenesis material into nursery, that too is another challenge. And the impact of how this will all fit into supply chain, and of course the attitude of those planting forests to more extensive use of varietals. And of course the inevitable question of how much would a plantlet develop through this approach cost. The challenges are substantial, but the rewards are very substantial. And I'm pleased to report that across the board, we're getting results that give us confidence. We don't have all the answers yet, nor are we pretending that our vision's been delivered on, but that the results are giving us confidence as we proceed. For example, Scion now has a suite of temporary immersion bioreactors. They have some 96 of these, all able to be programmed and remotely controlled. These operate by temporarily immersing the developing tissue material in liquid, which contains the various hormones and nutrients required at the different stages in development, being able to adjust the composition and time as they proceed. And it's all done remotely and managed by a computer. We have successfully used these to proliferate and mature some somatic embryos from Scion cell lines. The big task now in front of us is to extend that to other genotypes. To give us increased control over the environment in which the tissue develops, the program has developed a more advanced bioreactor that enables much greater control over the internal environment within it, such as the humidity and the internal gas composition. Our intention is that we'll be testing these systems fully out over this coming year. The above experimental program is being closely duplicated at Georgia Tech. This is useful as it provides not only experimental robustness, but also helps learn from their experience, transferring their knowledge to New Zealand. We also need to be able to take the plantlets arising from somatic embryogenesis process directly into the real world. To that end, Scion and LUCA have been looking at taking SE-derived plantlet and looking at the different time on germination media, the impact of cool storage, and different lighting regimes to enhance germination of mature somatic embryos and improving the quality of the rooting system using different microplugs and time. Taking the plantlets derived from somatic embryogenesis into the real world, we know that typically the resilience of pure SE plants has been poor, as has the development of robust rooting systems, and an ex vitro multiplication step has often been required. This is still very much work in progress, but we are progressing with confidence. We know that there are enormous gains to be made if we can avoid the extra ex vitro multiplication step, and so any success here will provide very significant gains and another step towards achieving our vision. Understanding the context in which the processes we are focusing on can be used commercially is also an important part of the program. In that respect, the Industry Advisory Group has been especially valuable. We have also undertaken some other consultation with industry with a specific focus on nursery growers. So far, we're not hearing any concerns over the use of varietals. In fact, it's been uniformly positive, although the question always comes up, and how much will it cost? The form and the size of the ultimate product is also of special interest, including the particular focus on rooting. It's too early to be able to give precise answers to these questions, but understanding the market and the supply chain is very helpful in helping us shape the focus of the actual science itself. Although I stress this is a propagation program and not a breeding program, the reality is that there is a very strong interrelationship between the two. We already know that some genotypes will create greater yields and more robust germinants through use of somatic embryogenesis than others. Perhaps we will get to a point where performance for somatic embryogenesis becomes a key criteria for breeding itself. This, combined with the ability to store cell lines of known performers and cryopreservation, would lead us to a very strategic approach to forest development and an important building block in the move towards precision forestry. We're now into our third year. I feel that we have a solid platform and strong partnerships to build on. The big challenge in front of us now is to build the best knowledge platform we can as the basis of what could be a very significant development for the New Zealand forest growing industry. Last but most importantly, I want to acknowledge what is a very substantial and very significant science team across three nations. I also want to acknowledge the technical advisory team whose advice has been gold, and the governance team whose time and commitment is very much appreciated. So on behalf of the science lead, Associate Professor Jana Klasnikova, and the wider team, very much thank you for your time and your interest.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Graham West, and I'm presenting on integrating information for site-specific management. What is site-specific management? This is well known. It's about optimizing the management regime to get the best from the site. And this has been achieved by the integration and systematization of information in large companies for some time there. But the issue I want to address is really that there are no tools to do this for small and medium enterprise forestry. And as land use is a political issue now, and there are lots of regulatory changes, now this situation is going to become increasingly dynamic with further changes coming. Integration and systematization are similar approaches. The integration for large growers is achieved by building large systems that cope with data and services, models, planning tools, etc., generally wrapped up in an enterprise resource planning system. For small scale forest growers, there's no such system, and that integration needs to be provided by tools that we create. They have a home computer, an internet, and a farm map, and that's about it. The rationale is that there have been hundreds of science reports, produced that are not read by small-scale forest growers. They simply don't pick up information that way, and or a limited amount. And many research results that are reported are trial-specific or site-specific and require that interpretation. And we know that profits are very much determined by site factors. So the goal here is, how to better transfer research results to growers, how to transfer to new forest investors and their advisors. And it largely provides an initial desktop analysis and builds awareness. And for the last 20 years, we've had a lot of results that have come out that have been spatial. And so we've had, work around modelling for wind, forest residue, species productivity, disease, climate change, harvesting, systems optimization, and erosion, which is great work. It's been out there, in some cases over 20 years, but hasn't really been picked up, I think, to the degree that we could do. Here's examples of it. Dave Palmer and others doing great work connecting forest growth measurements with environmental factors and giving you a specific productivity, in this case, the 300 index for radiata that's mapped here, showing that the red, warmer colours are where radiata grows really well, and other sites where it doesn't grow very well. This is strategically really useful information. It's been out there for now 11 years. When I show it to farm forestry people, most of them have never seen it. It goes down to a fine level of resolution, 100 by 100 metre pixel, and so you can pick up and use this information at a paddock or woodlot level. Others like Mike Watt have taken this further to really develop optimum silvicultural regimes by site. So here is a structural regime versus a pruned regime, giving very different results, mapping out the optimum stand density or stocking for each case. Wood density is also mapped nationally and shows, importantly, where the high density wood or higher strength wood could be grown versus the lower density. This has been out for some time. Alternative species productivity like Cupressus lusitanica shows where it grows well in New Zealand. Ditto for redwoods, same for eucalypts and other species, and these have been updated. This one's been updated recently in 2021. We also have climate change mapping that's occurring out of NIWA, scenarios that are showing that the eastern and northern parts of New Zealand will get much drier. This has serious impacts for forest investors, and they really aren't aware of this. The impact of that has flowed on to fire danger, and this is mapping scenarios for fire danger through time, showing that by 2090 significant areas could have extreme weather conditions. Same for disease risk. This is mapping scenarios for cyclone Uzma, showing that in the future, this disease could be much more prevalent throughout New Zealand. Avoided erosion. So erosion is going to be a big factor in terms of tree planting, and this shows the erosion rate and what's can be avoided with tree planting, very important. And this shows the coverage of LiDAR that's going to be improved over the next 3 or 4 years by LINS. And in essence, what this is pointing out is that the layers of information that are needed to drive forestry decisions are being improved year by year, and there's a complete program behind that. Terrain is very important in terms of costs, particularly around harvesting time. So for some time, we've known what are the major drivers of woodlot net profit. This typical example, small woodlot near a lake in Rotorua, some way from the road. And what we say in farm forestry is there are 3 factors. They are location, which is psychology, or the local terrain, ground cover, productivity. Location, the distance to the road. Location, distance to the market. And so location, 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 easy to remember, major factors, just like real estate, and driving woodlot profitability. The real question is, what are the trade-offs? You know, what are the best solutions? Because we can now optimize that better by knowing which parts of a property would produce the best results. What is the possible framework for doing this? We've got a lot of spatial data nationally that's available, rainfall, soil type, slope, etc. And these are already being used somewhat in producing tree productivity mappings that I've shown you there, but they could be used to produce greenhouse gases or carbon sequestration or eco-services. And these need to be converted into a web service and integrated into a tool so that you can look at this information at a stand or paddock level, and could also have a temporal dimension to them. And that in turn is converted into an economic model. So in this case, we're interested in wood, but it could be other crops that we could be interested in. And that in turn is used in a scenario analysis, particularly around investment analysis. So what are the cash flows there? What is the environmental balance there? These are the important questions and integration that investors are looking for. What we've created so far is tools like Forecaster, which are back here, and these are not integrated into any system. They are standalone applications like the radiata calculators, the redwood calculator, the cypress calculator, the eucalypt calculator, etc. And they don't give the full use of the science that's coming out of FGR. What we've picked up on is, in the last couple of years, is this issue, and particularly around harvesting. We've put together a tool called Tree Farmer with levy funding and farm forestry support. And this particularly looks at the big issues and costs at harvest time around, the costs of harvest, eroding, and builds awareness in that area. What's changed and allowed this to happen is there is really new technology out there that didn't allow this to occur. The key is that we now can have direct access to data via web services over the web. So, Land Information New Zealand, etc., are holding databases there of information and publishing it over the web. So it gives you access. So we don't have to store all this information locally anymore. There are open source tools that are available with no special licensing, and these can be run over a virtual server in the cloud. There's probably web hosting costs involved in there, but we don't have to build a lot of infrastructure. And these can be delivered to a public interface via open source tools, again, in the web browser. So this is not an application you download. It's run in your browser. It requires the internet, but you don't have to store the data. It gets it the latest and greatest over the web. and it's costing virtually nothing in terms of licensing fee. We couldn't do that a few years ago. It's a game changer. The results in Tree Farmer look something like this. We map out aerial photography. It shows woodlots, roads, waterways, and we can turn on layers of information around slope, erosion, shingle pits, and land parcels. At the top here, we've got a range of productivity layers being added in, and these give you the potential growth rates for at least 4, probably going to be 5 species. On the right are the applications of either tree planting or harvesting trees. So far it only does those 2 things there. In terms of tree planting, it allows you to define where you're going to plant. It allows you to apply a species and a regime, gives the yields, will give the carbon and the associated costs. For harvesting, it allows you to look at roading scenarios, gives you roading slope, roading costs. Here we're looking at harvesting 2 woodlots, for example, with a connecting road back to a skid at the roadside there. And on the right, it gives you the cost per tonne, etc., driven by slope and other factors that are underpinning these algorithms there. So the objectives of Tree Farmer are really to reach thousands of people, not hundreds of people, over the internet. We actually need to reach 12,000 small growers and 25,000 farmers in New Zealand to raise general awareness, really not to provide an expert system, to allow comparisons of options and scenarios. But importantly, you know, I'm raising the question, is this the R&D delivery framework that we need to be developing to get this science out there and making an impact? So to summarize, the integration of research results into tools is required for uptake. That is, I'm saying that uptake will not occur unless we provide this integration and we provide these tools. And this is a key part of what small growers are looking for in what they're paying in the levy. They want to see impact and change. The key enablers are computer skills, good internet speed, free and smart geospatial tools. And we've got some of those, but computer skills are a challenge for this group. Mostly over 65 years of age, you know, mostly only able to do emails and things like that. But I'm surprised at how adaptable they are. But we do need to think new ways to find out and reach these people. It's going to require promotion support and additional layers and functionality added to it. And there's been some funding potentially coming through next year to continue with that. But it does need an ongoing support. We cannot rely on D1S1 to be there forever to promote and support this sort of tool. So my message key to you is really that building landowner knowledge out of the current science program will build forestry investment. And that's the goal here is, you know, how do we expand the forest estate and get better delivery and impact from the current science group. Thank you.